Inspired by time constraints during my travels to Thailand, I've been experimenting using the one set to failure method of training to see if it's viable to progress or at a minimum maintain my calisthenics training while still pursuing other activities while I'm here. If you're interested in the pros and cons to this training method, then stick around. I've been using the high rep, high frequency approach to training ever since I stumbled across K Bogue's videos around 2 years ago at the start of my YouTube journey. I fell in love with this approach as it allowed me to work out from home using very little equipment and a lower time commitment than traditional training methods, especially if we factor in the time it takes to commute to and from a busy gym. During this recent trip to Thailand, I wanted to take advantage of the high quality trainers for a fraction of the price in my home country and focus my efforts mainly on Muay Thai. However, I also didn't want my calisthenics training to suffer too much, so I designed myself a training protocol that utilizes one set to failure in each muscle group. I was initially a little unsure and skeptical around whether this would be enough volume to maintain my progress, let alone continue to progress with calisthenics. After a month of doing these trainings, and even getting sick and having to take a few days off to recover, I can say without a doubt that this is an extremely time-efficient approach to calisthenics training, perfect for those with a busy schedule with very few drawbacks. The reason it works so well is because in general, we can either train intensely or long, but rarely both. Sure, we can build the capacity to train more intensely for a longer duration, but there's always a trade-off, which is why no one can realistically keep up a 100-meter pace for the entirety of a marathon. The focus of this approach is to up the intensity while reducing the duration to compensate, making it more or less equivalent to a workout of a longer duration but less intensity. By far the biggest drawback was that training my muscles to complete failure initially caused more byproducts to form, such as lactic acid, making my muscles sorer than usual the following days. I noticed this would go away after a light warm-up, so it really didn't impact my Muay Thai trainings too much. Also worth noting is that my body quickly adapted to this new protocol, and this was not an issue after the initial week of training. As the focus was on going to complete failure, I used my previous workouts as a reference point to how hard I should push myself. However, performance is unfortunately never linear, and my work rate was also impacted by my Muay Thai sessions outside of these trainings, so it was highly unrealistic to expect to add a repetition each workout and progress in this linear fashion. If you're someone who constantly needs to see metrics go up, such as more weight on the bar or more reps than the previous workout, then this might be a bigger drawback. For someone with my own interests, being more focused on mastering the basics, skill progression, and longevity, then a period without seeing much numerical progress likely won't bother you as much and has the benefit of giving a more intuitive feel around how hard you should push, how these trainings affect your capacity in other workouts, and of course, how your body feels and responds to performing just one set to failure with each muscle group. The structure was as follows. For chest, I did one set of push-ups to failure. For back, one set of pull-ups to failure. For legs, one set of squats to failure. For shoulders, one set of handstand push-ups to failure. And for core, leg raises to failure. Now, to make sure I was actually achieving as close as possible to complete failure within each muscle group, I utilized drop sets. This meant that once I failed at regular push-ups, I would continue on my knees. Once I failed at pull-ups, I'd perform rows to failure. This meant I'd get as close to muscular failure as possible, but wouldn't be tempted to crank out reps with poor form, as I would instead switch to an easier variation that would allow me to continue without sacrificing on the fundamentals. A side note, these workouts are brutal, but over quickly and very enjoyable for those who really enjoy pushing themselves. While conventional literature shows that you don't need to push that close to failure to progress, that ignores all the other benefits that training to this capacity has. Improvements to endurance, ability to recover, increased tolerance to pain, greater VO2 max, which is one of the best predictors of longevity, and the slew of other overall physical and mental benefits that comes from implementing any physical activity regime that you can be consistent with over the long term. Just keep in mind that you might initially take a bit longer to recover from this style of workout, and your risk of injury when training this close to failure goes up marginally. So keep the focus on form to counterbalance its downside.
I think one of the probably main reasons that Ronnie got really injured is that he cranked the dials on a lot of different variables. He trained with very high loads, very high intensity, and very high volume. Those three things combined is more injurious than just turning up a couple of those variables.
Sure.
So like take Dorian Yates, for example. People say, oh, Ronnie trained so heavy, that's why he got injured. So well, Dorian Yates trained heavy too, but he had lower volume.
Your search for optimization will often not be appropriate in other environments, as it can create patterns of rigidity. What worked for me to keep my training consistent during my time away was broadening my skill set through rigorous experimentation, which eventually led me to the conclusion that almost all exercise protocols work if you can stick with them. As always, if you have any questions, comments, or abuse, then drop them down below. Cheers.